Hi Bookish Besties, my name is Brittany. This is Rescues and Reads. Thank you so much for joining me here today. If you are new, welcome. I'm so glad you're here. And if you're already subscribed, as always, I appreciate your continued support. Thank you for returning to another video. Today we are here to talk about some books and authors that I don't feel like I can recommend to everyone. Hello everyone and welcome to another Bookmas video. Today I'm here to discuss some specific books as well as just authors in general that I do not feel like I can recommend to everyone. As a quick caveat, I really don't think that there's any book or author that could be recommended to absolutely everyone, but these specifically are ones that I don't feel like I could recommend to a large population of people. I believe I got the idea for this from Sarah from Sarah's Nightstand. I believe that she filmed something like this recently and I thought it was a really good idea. I have about 10 books / authors that I want to mention in this video, so we are going to go ahead and jump right in. And oddly enough, when I was considering doing this video, the very first book that came to mind is also the very first book that Sarah featured in her video, and that is All the Ugly and Wonderful Things by Bryn Greenwood. This is probably a book with some of the most disturbing subject matter that I have ever read, and a lot of people are going to find it extremely distasteful. However, I thought that it was beautifully written, I thought that it was well done, and I actually thought that it was a relationship that you could read for. If you are not familiar, All the Ugly and Wonderful Things follows our main character, Wavy, and the book starts and she's about 6 years old, but essentially she's like the only adult in her family. Her father, if I remember correctly, is like this big drug lord in their community. He has a lot of henchmen, a lot of minions. Her mother is very, very neglectful. So Wavy ends up being the parent to her baby brother. After a couple of years, you're following her as she meets Kellen. Kellen is one of her father's henchmen and he wipes out on his motorcycle one day and she sees and she kind of goes over and helps him. And thus begins their relationship. Now at the beginning of this relationship, Kellen, I believe, is in his early 20s. And like I said, Wavy is around 8 years old. And at first it starts very much as like this father-daughter relationship. Kellen realizes that Wavy is not being taken care of and he kind of steps into that role. But after several years of growing closer, their relationship turns sexual. I believe their relationship turns sexual when Wavy is about 14 or 15 years old and Kellen is in his late 20s. So there is definitely a very inappropriate age difference here, a very illegal age difference going on here. While it definitely gives you the ick while you're reading it, like I said, I thought that Bryn Greenwood did a phenomenal job with the story. I thought she wrote it beautifully and I thought that she wrote it in a way that really made you want to root for this relationship, especially as Wavy got older and she had more agency. You really wanted to see this relationship bloom because you realize that Kellen is one of the only steady, reliable people in her life and he is truly one that looks out for her and loves her. And so I know a lot of people are not going to be able to get behind this relationship in any way, shape, or form, but I actually was really, really surprised by how much I adored this book and how much I was actually invested in the relationship. So this is one that I know I could not recommend to a large population of people, but I do think that it is truly worth the read. So next I'm going to recommend two books, but they are part of a series. I've only read the first two books in the series, which is why I'm only going to talk about them here, but that is Binding and Keeping 13 by Chloe Walsh. There are quite a few reasons why I don't feel like I could recommend this to a lot of people. First of all, it is a YA contemporary romance. Now I do stand by the fact that I believe that this is more new adult / adult than it is young adult just because of the content and themes that are featured in these stories. However, it is classified in most places as young adult and I know a lot of people are not going to be able to get behind that. Also, these books are incredibly long. I believe the editions that I have are over 600 pages and I've heard some people say that they are over 800 pages where they are from. So these books are incredibly long and I'm going to be the first to admit that they 100% do not need to be this long. There is no contemporary romance that needs to be this long and I feel like these books could have used a good editing, but I was so invested in the characters and I really just kind of ate up the angst. I've said this before, but reading these books really reminded me of similar experiences with watching a teenage melodrama like Dawson's Creek and One Tree Hill. So I think that's why the length and the repetitiveness didn't necessarily bother me because it was very similar to what you get when you are watching these kinds of shows. And there are some seriously heavy themes in here, very, very heavy themes. And that is why I say I'm more willing to classify these as new adult / even adult just because of that. But perhaps one of the main reasons why I don't think that I could recommend this to a lot of people is that there is an excessive amount of language in here. There's an excessive amount of cursing and there's also an excessive amount of using the Lord's name in vain. Now, as somebody who is very much non-religious, it doesn't bother me at all. And neither does the cursing because, again, I curse quite frequently in my daily life. But just to let you know that the words fuck and Jesus Christ and all of this is probably used in every other sentence in this story. But I felt that was accurate to the way that a lot of young people talk these days. But I know that a lot of these things are going to turn people off of this series, but I loved it and I cannot wait to continue in this series. All right, and so this next one, I'm only putting this on this list because almost every single booktuber that I follow that has read this book recently has really disliked it, and that absolutely breaks my heart because I adored this book with my whole heart and soul, and I objectively do not know how people cannot enjoy this story. And that is Assistant to the Villain by Hannah Nicole Mayer. I think I've seen 3 or 4 booktubers in a row now who have read this who have given it like a 1 or 2 or maybe a 3-star being generous. Like I said, that absolutely breaks my heart because this is one of the most delightful books that I have read this year. It is a very kind of cozy fantasy romance. There is very, very little of the romance in book 1, but I just absolutely loved this. I loved the plot line. I absolutely loved the characters. There's a quirky frog in here who cannot speak, and so he holds up signs anytime he wants to say something. There was so much about this that I absolutely loved. I legitimately do not get the complaints about this book. So really, the only reason why I even thought to put this on this list is just because of how many people I've seen recently that have disliked it, and it kind of opened my eyes to the fact that maybe not everybody is going to like this book, which we can overlook their wrong opinion. But I just kind of wanted to throw this one in here just because I am legitimately surprised at how many people recently have not enjoyed this book. I also don't believe that I would be able to recommend My Dear Hamilton or America's First Daughter, which are historical fictions written by Stephanie Dray and Laura Camoy. And the reason why I say this is because even people who absolutely love historical fiction don't necessarily love these books. And the reason is because they are on the longer side and they are incredibly slow. I kind of classify this as autobiographical historical narrative fiction. America's First Daughter is all about Patsy Jefferson, and My Dear Hamilton is all about Eliza Hamilton. And both books are written from the perspectives of each lady as though they are writing it down and telling it to you. So you are getting a lot of the details of their lives, and because of that, it is very, very character driven. It is very slow. It is very in-depth. You are getting the full scope of these women's lives to the best of the ability of Stephanie Dray and Laura Camoy. They're very well researched. They use a lot of historical documentation in order to write these stories, and I feel that's very evident within them. I listened to both of these on audiobooks, of course, and like I said, they are on the longer side, but I feel like if you are listening to them, it doesn't feel maybe as long as if you are reading them because they are so slow. I feel like listening to them can definitely help with your reading experience of these books, but I absolutely adored both of them. But I understand why these books would not be for everyone, even those who absolutely adore historical fiction. They're definitely far more character driven and less focused on the plot because the plot is these women's lives, right? And so you're slowly unfolding everything in these women's lives right up until the end of their lives. And I just really appreciated what Stephanie Dray and Laura Camoy were able to do with these stories, and that is why I recommend them, but I know that they are not going to be for everyone. Another book that I absolutely loved, it's one of my favorite books of all time, but I know that not everyone is going to appreciate it, and that is Razorblade Tears by S.A. Cosby. In fact, I might be able to just say S.A. Cosby is not going to be for everyone because his books are incredibly dark, they are violent, they are gritty crime thrillers. Razorblade Tears is about 2 very different men, one black, one white, but they have a couple of things in common. First of all, they are criminals. They have lived a lot of their lives on the wrong side of the law, and both of their sons are gay and were married to each other, and they did not approve of that relationship. So both of them were kind of estranged from their sons, and both of their sons were violently killed, and both of these dads decide to unite and try to get vengeance for their sons. And so it is incredibly violent, but it is so satisfyingly violent. You root for these men, you want them to get their vengeance. I am all for a vigilante justice kind of story, and that's exactly what this was. But along the way, it's not just about that. It's about them coming to terms with their guilt, the fact that they are never going to be able to make things right with their sons, that they spent so much time hating who their sons were when they really should just have spent time loving and accepting who their sons were, and they're never going to be able to get that time back. S.A. Cosby has beautiful writing. His writing is absolutely exquisite for the kind of stories that he writes. So I just really appreciate almost everything about his books, but I know that he is not going to be for everyone just from the sheer violent nature of his stories. Similarly, I want to talk about these 2 authors together because I can't recommend them to everyone for basically the same reasons. That is Karen Slaughter and Jennifer Hillier. Both of them write extremely dark thrillers. Neither one of these authors is afraid to put their characters through some very tough and hard to read things. That is especially true of Karen Slaughter, and so you have to be prepared going in, but honestly, Karen Slaughter is one of my favorite thrillers of all time just because she is not afraid to cross the line. She is not afraid to go to those dark places. I think Jennifer Hillier is not quite as dark as Karen Slaughter, so she might be more palatable for some, but she can certainly still write some messed up storylines, and that's what I like. I love, as Audrey from Chapter and Converse would say, I love to watch dark and messed up people doing dark and messed up things, but if you are not really a thriller person, or if you are just trying to get into thrillers, these are not women that I would recommend that you start with, and I definitely wouldn't recommend these authors if you are on the more sensitive side, if you definitely cannot handle the violent and gruesome nature of the stories that they are telling. These are ones that I would say to read if you are more experienced in the genre, or if you don't mind dark and messed up people doing dark and messed up things. I always find their plots very, very compelling, and they're just very, very well crafted and well written. And so I love these ladies. I love their books. I will probably read everything that they write going forward, and I want to recommend them to everyone, but they are definitely authors that I know I cannot recommend to everyone. Another book slash author that I know that I can't recommend to everyone is Freida McFadden, specifically The Teacher. I would say most of the people I know that have read The Teacher have very much disliked it or have DNF'd it, and I will say that quite a few of that population has been teachers themselves, and so I don't think that they can handle the subject matter in the story, which does deal with a student-teacher relationship. It is very icky, it is very creepy, it is not something that you root for. You're not supposed to root for it, by the way. But this story is told from the perspective of the student in that relationship, as well as the wife of the teacher who is in that relationship. And I, again, thought that it was just very well crafted. I love the twists that Freida McFadden tosses into her stories. It was, as all Freida McFaddens are, compulsively readable, bingeable. It was just a candy kind of book. Freida McFadden has a lot of naysayers, but if you want a popcorn thriller, but it's going to keep you entertained, that is going to keep the pages turning, and you're not going to have to think too terribly hard about, Freida McFadden is the girl to go to. Nobody is ever going to say that her thrillers are literary masterpieces. For the most part, I feel like her writing is quite basic and straightforward, but I do really enjoy her stories. Like I said, I really enjoy her twists, and The Teacher was no different. I had a great time with The Teacher, and I think that if you can get past the student-teacher relationship, which is going to give everybody the ick, you don't have to be a teacher to get the ick from that. I know that they don't necessarily like that representation in the book, but you know, I hate to say this, but it's true to life. It happens. You don't want it to happen. You don't want to believe it happens, but unfortunately it happens. So I get why they don't like that representation, but honestly, it really didn't bother me. It was just all part of the messed up people in that story, and I had a great time with it, but I know why a lot of people would not appreciate it. Another author that I just want to quickly mention here, because she has the most polarizing opinions of any fan base I think out there at this moment, and that is Colleen Hoover. Y'all know how I feel about Colleen Hoover. Colleen Hoover is honestly one of my favorite contemporary authors of all time. Now, I obviously cannot speak for everybody, but I think that one of the reasons why people dislike her so much is because they consider some of her relationships as problematic. They feel like she's romanticizing problematic relationships, and to be quite fair, I have not had the same experience when I've been reading her books, but also at the same time, I disagree wholeheartedly with branding an author or a book problematic. I have a whole rant about this on my channel somewhere, but I believe that problematic is extremely subjective, and what is problematic to you is not going to be problematic to other people. And I also feel like if everyone in the world were to agree that something specific was problematic, that it doesn't negate the fact that life is problematic, and what is being represented in the book is also something that is happening in real life, and not writing about it is not going to prevent it from happening in real life. I know that people want to believe that if it's written about less, it will happen in real life less. Like, people out there do not have autonomy, and they are making these decisions on their own, but they are getting these ideas from books. So if people are reading a toxic, problematic relationship in a Colleen Hoover book, that they are going to instantly go out there and have that relationship for themselves. I don't agree with that. I don't believe that to be the case. And I feel like authors and publishers are putting out stories because they trust the readers to be able to read critically and to be able to understand that this is fiction and that this is not necessarily something that's condoned or should be brought to life. And so I think by putting that pressure on the author, that it is unfair. Authors can write about whatever they want to write about, just like we as readers can read whatever we want to read about, and we have the right to critically read and provide feedback on the story. And that was a tangent that I didn't mean to go on. Now, there are some obviously who have read her books and have just legitimately not liked the story or the writing or the plot, and that is completely valid. I am not saying that anybody who doesn't like Colleen Hoover is not valid. Obviously, that is not the case. However, just in general, I really find her stories compelling. I find a lot of her stories have harder hitting elements, and a lot of them get me very, very emotional. They do, in my opinion, feature relationships that I can root for, and ultimately I find them pretty well written, and some of them have pretty good underlying messages. And so I know Colleen Hoover is not going to be for everybody, so I wouldn't recommend her to everyone, but she is definitely a favorite of mine. A series that I really don't feel like I can recommend to everyone is going to be the Nevernight Chronicles by Jay Kristoff, which y'all know is one of my favorite series of all time. I don't read everything written by Jay Kristoff just because he does write some stories that I'm not interested in. He still writes in the young adult age range, and even though the Illuminate Files is like one of my favorite series of all time because of the reading experience, I don't necessarily think I would read everything YA that he puts out. So he is not necessarily like an auto by author for me, but I absolutely love his writing. I love his sense of humor. I think he is a genius, and I feel like that's very well expressed in the Nevernight Chronicles, which is an adult fantasy following Mia Corberry, who is an assassin. And the first book is following her journey to become an official assassin, and then the other two books kind of go off the rails a little bit as she goes on this journey to get revenge for what happened to her family when she was 10 years old. And one of the reasons why I don't feel like I can recommend this to everyone is just because of the writing style. I don't necessarily feel like his writing style works for everyone, particularly in this story, because it has footnotes. Now, I will say that the footnotes are not mandatory to read. So if you are reading it physically, you do not have to read the footnotes in order to get the full story. It just provides context and an added layer of humor because a lot of it is really, really funny, and it had me laughing out loud. So I do recommend reading the footnotes, but if you feel like that's going to take you out of the story, you don't have to read it. Now, if you are listening to the book, the footnotes are incorporated into the narrative without skipping a beat, so you don't even know that you're listening to the footnotes. But I'm just saying that that turns a lot of people off. But also, another reason why I don't think that I can recommend this to everyone is just, again, because it's violent, it's crude, it is definitely very adult. So there is sexual content in here, but I loved the relationships, especially the queer relationship that is in here. There are a lot of amazing things about this series, and I would love to recommend it to everyone, but I know that I can't. And then the final book slash series I wanted to mention here is the Collector series by Dot Hutchinson, and I can't recommend this series to everyone for similar reasons to why I couldn't recommend Karen Slaughter and Jennifer Hillier. This is a 4-book series that deals with some very dark subject matter. The first book, called The Butterfly Garden, is about a gentleman who had this very, very elaborate setup where he would kidnap girls of a certain age and he would tattoo them with specific like butterfly wings on their back. So he would call them his butterflies. And once they reached a certain age, he would kill them and basically preserve them. They were like in these big vats of preservation liquid and they were on display. And so all of the other butterflies that were currently alive and living, they were going to be able to see all of his past butterflies, you know, and they knew what fate was going to lead them to. And so this also follows a team of FBI agents who are trying to find these missing girls and what happens when they escape and all of this stuff. And I actually felt The Butterfly Garden was the weakest of the stories. I enjoyed 2, 3, and 4 much better than I enjoyed The Butterfly Garden. And what I like about these series is that you are not just following the same FBI agents for all the other books, but you're also following the victims from each book, and they carry on into the other books and they all form like this found family relationship that is absolutely wonderful. And in the other books, you get to know the FBI agents a little bit more as well. But like I said, every single book covers really dark and disturbing topics, and you have to be able to handle that before you are going in. I really enjoyed the series, especially the last few books of the series, and it is certainly one I would recommend if you think that you can handle the subject matter, but I know not everybody is going to be able to. All right, everyone, those are some books slash authors that I don't think that I would be able to recommend to a wide array of people. Please comment down below and let me know some books or authors that you don't think you would be able to recommend to everyone. Or if you've made it to the end of this video and you were not feeling chatty, go ahead and leave me a butterfly emoji in honor of The Butterfly Garden by Dot Hutchinson. And as always, if you like this video, or if you just like me, please be sure to give it a big thumbs up. Throughout the month of December, from the 1st through the 25th, I'm aiming to post 1 video a day leading up to Christmas. And if you don't want to miss any of this chaos or content, please be sure to subscribe down below. I would love to connect with you in any of those future videos or on any of my other social media platforms, which you can always find linked down below along with any books featured in the video. Until next time, y'all, bye.